The desert moon hung fat and silver above the Arizona territory, casting long shadows across the red rocks that jutted from the earth like ancient bones. Daniel Yazzie guided his paint horse down the narrow trail toward Cedar Creek, the only water source for miles in this unforgiving stretch of land. It was late summer of 1878, and even the night air carried the day's heat like a grudge. He'd been riding for 3 days straight, following rumors of wild mustangs that might fetch good money at Fort Defiance. His water was running low, and his horse's sides were caked with dust and sweat. The creek would be a blessing for both of them. As he descended toward the water, something made him pull up short. His horse's ears pricked forward, nostrils flaring. Daniel's hand moved instinctively to the Winchester in his saddle scabbard. Years of living between two worlds, the Navajo nation of his birth and the expanding frontier of the whites, had taught him to trust his mount's instincts. Then he heard it a splash, followed by what sounded like humming. A woman's voice, soft and melodic, drifting through the desert air like smoke from a distant fire. Daniel dismounted silently. Leaving his horse ground-tied behind a cluster of mesquite, he moved forward on foot, each step calculated to avoid the loose stones that might betray his presence. The humming continued, punctuated by gentle splashing. Through the screen of cottonwood branches, he saw her. A woman stood waist-deep in the moonlit water, her back to him, long auburn hair flowing down pale shoulders like liquid copper. She was completely unclothed, her skin glowing ghostly white in the lunar light as she cupped water in her hands and let it cascade over her arms. For a moment, Daniel forgot to breathe. In all his 28 years, split between the sacred mountains of his people and the rough frontier towns, he'd never seen anything quite like this. She seemed almost otherworldly, like one of the water spirits his grandmother used to speak of in hushed tones. Then practical thoughts crashed through his wonderment. What was a white woman doing alone in Apache country? The nearest settlement was 2 days' ride. Was this some kind of trap? His fingers tightened on his rifle. The woman turned slightly, and he caught her profile, delicate features marked by something he recognized all too well, the hollowness that comes from running too hard for too long. She wasn't here for pleasure. She was here because she had nowhere else to go. A twig snapped under his boot. The humming stopped. The woman spun around, her eyes wide with terror. In her panic, she lost her footing on the slippery creek stones and went under with a splash. Daniel cursed under his breath in Navajo and crashed through the brush toward the water. She surfaced, sputtering and flailing, clearly not a strong swimmer. Without thinking, he waded in, boots and all. "Easy," he called out in English. "I won't hurt you." She screamed a raw, desperate sound that echoed off the canyon walls. Her hands clawed at the water as she tried to back away, but the current, gentle as it was, kept pushing her off balance. Daniel stopped, waist-deep himself now, and held up both hands. "Stop fighting the water," he said, keeping his voice level. "Plant your feet. The creek's not deep." Something in his tone must have penetrated her panic. She stopped thrashing, found her footing, and stood. The water came just above her waist. Her arms crossed over her chest, and she was shaking from cold or fear or both. They stood there in the middle of Cedar Creek, two strangers frozen in moonlight and mutual wariness. "Please," she whispered, teeth chattering. "Please don't." "I said I won't hurt you," Daniel repeated. He was acutely aware of how this looked a Navajo warrior catching a white woman bathing alone. In any frontier town, this would be grounds for a lynching. No questions asked. You need to get out of the water before you catch your death. Her green eyes searched his face, looking for deception. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she nodded slightly, but she didn't move. My clothes," she managed. Daniel spotted them on a flat rock near the bank, a worn traveling dress, undergarments, and a pair of boots that had seen better days. Keeping his eyes averted, he waded back to shore and gathered them up, then turned his back. "Get dressed," he said. "I'll wait." He heard her splash toward the bank, the rustle of fabric, soft gasps as she struggled into her clothes with shaking hands. His mind raced. Who was she? Where had she come from? And more importantly, who was she running from? "You can turn around," she said after what felt like an eternity. She stood on the bank, fully dressed now, but still shivering. Her hair hung in wet ropes, and her dress clung to her damp skin. Up close, he could see she was younger than he'd first thought, maybe 25, pretty, in that delicate way white women often were, but there was steel in her spine. "You didn't survive alone in this country without it." "Thank you," she said quietly. For being decent." Daniel shrugged. "My mother raised me right." The mention of his mother sent an unexpected pang through his chest. She'd been gone 2 winters now, and he still wasn't used to it. "What's your name?" the woman asked. Daniel Yazzie." He watched her carefully. "You." She hesitated, and he saw her crafting a lie. Then something shifted in her expression, resignation. Maybe, or just exhaustion. "Catherine," she said, "Catherine Moore." "Well, Catherine Moore, what are you doing bathing alone in Apache country in the middle of the night?" Her chin lifted. "I could ask what you're doing sneaking up on women in the dark." Despite everything, Daniel felt his mouth twitch toward a smile. "Fair point. I was heading for water. My horse and I have been riding hard." "Where's your horse?" He whistled low, and the paint mare came ambling through the brush, reins dragging. Catherine took an involuntary step back. "She won't hurt you either," Daniel said. He pulled his canteen from the saddle and offered it to her. "When's the last time you ate?" Catherine looked at the canteen like it might bite her, then carefully took it. "Thank you." She drank deeply, and he noticed how her hands still trembled. 2 days, maybe 3. I lost track." "Where's your horse, your supplies?" "Gone." The word came out flat. Final. Daniel studied her. Her dress was quality, or had been once. Her hands, though dirty, showed no calluses from hard labor. This was no frontier woman. This was someone who'd lived soft until recently. "You running from the law?" he asked bluntly. "No." She handed back the canteen. "From something worse." He waited, but she offered nothing more. Fair enough. Everyone in the territory had secrets. "There's a trading post at Bitter Springs," he said. "Day-and-a-half ride. I can take you that far." "I can't pay you." "I didn't ask for payment." She searched his face again. "Why would you help me?" It was a good question. The smart thing would be to point her toward the trail and ride on. A white woman could only bring trouble, but something about her, the way she stood straight despite her fear, the way she'd faced him in the water instead of running, reminded him of his mother in her last days. Proud, and hurting, and trying not to show it. "My mother used to say the desert teaches us to share water," he said finally. "Come on, we'll camp up canyon where there's cover." Catherine nodded slowly. "All right." As Daniel led his horse away from the creek, Catherine following at a careful distance. He wondered what he was getting himself into. The woman was clearly in some kind of trouble, and trouble in the territory had a way of spreading like wildfire. But he couldn't shake the image of her in the moonlight, vulnerable and fierce at the same time, like a warrior who'd lost her weapon but not her will to fight. They found a sheltered spot beneath an overhang of red rock. Daniel unsaddled his horse and hobbled her to graze on the sparse grass. He gathered deadwood for a small fire, aware of Catherine watching his every move. "You know how to make a fire that won't be seen from a distance," she observed. "Learned young." He struck his flint and steel, coaxing the spark into flame. "You learn too, or you don't survive out here." When the fire was crackling softly, he dug into his saddlebags and pulled out some jerky and hardtack. Not much, but it would keep them until Bitter Springs. Catherine ate slowly, carefully, like someone who'd learned not to wolf down food even when starving. "Between bites," she asked, Are you from around here? Born about 50 miles north. My people have been here since before the Spanish came. He paused. You're not from the territory. Boston, originally. She stared into the fire. Then Denver, then other places. Long way from Boston. Yes. She pulled her knees up to her chest, making herself small. It is. They sat in silence for a while, the fire popping between them. In the distance, a coyote howled, and others answered. Catherine shivered. They won't come close to the fire, Daniel assured her. I know. I've been sleeping rough for a week. She glanced at him. Aren't you going to ask? Ask what? What a proper Boston lady is doing running around the desert in a torn dress with no horse and no provisions. Daniel poked at the fire with a stick. Figure you'll tell me if you want to. Or not. Either way, come morning. I'll see you safe to Bitter Springs. Catherine's eyes glistened in the firelight. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? I don't know. Everything I was told about Indians. She stopped, flushing. That were savages who'd ravish white women on sight. His voice came out harder than he'd intended. I'm sorry, that was thoughtless. Daniel shrugged. You're not the first to think it. Won't be the last. He studied her. Though you didn't seem too surprised when I spoke English. I've learned not to make assumptions about people based on appearance. A bitter smile touched her lips. Some of the most savage men I've known wore fine suits and spoke the Queen's English. There was a story there, but Daniel didn't push. They all had stories out here. You should sleep, he said. I'll keep watch. I couldn't. When's the last time you really slept, not just dozed with one eye open? She was quiet for a long moment. A week, maybe more. Then sleep. Nothing's going to hurt you tonight. Catherine looked at him, really looked at him, and Daniel felt something shift in the air between them. Trust. Maybe, or just shared understanding between two people who'd learned the hard way that the world could be cruel. All right, she said softly. She curled up near the fire, using her arm as a pillow. Daniel sat with his back to the rock wall, rifle across his knees, and watched the desert. The moon was starting its descent toward the western mountains. In a few hours, dawn would paint the rocks blood red, and they'd ride for Bitter Springs. He glanced at the sleeping woman. Even in rest, her face showed lines of strain. Whatever she was running from had marked her, but she hadn't broken. That took a particular kind of strength. His mother would have liked her, he thought suddenly. His mother had always been able to see past the surface of people, to find the steel or the softness underneath, as if summoned by his thoughts. He remembered his mother's words from her deathbed. You spend too much time alone. My son, one day, the Creator will send someone who needs you as much as you need them. Don't be too proud to see it. He'd thought she was fevered, talking nonsense. Now, watching Catherine sleep by his fire, he wondered. The desert night wrapped around them, vast and full of secrets. Somewhere out there, whatever Catherine was running from was still searching. But for now, in this small circle of firelight, there was peace. Daniel settled in for his watch, knowing that come morning, his simple Mustang hunt had become something far more complicated. The woman who'd never run away again had found her protector, though neither of them knew it yet. The morning sun painted the red rocks in shades of gold and copper as they rode into Bitter Springs trading post. Catherine sat behind Daniel on his paint mare, her arms loosely circled around his waist. She'd been hesitant about the arrangement at first, but two people on one horse was the only option. The trading post was typical for the territory adobe walls, a few scraggly cottonwoods for shade, and a well that had seen better days. A handful of horses stood at the hitching rail, and smoke rose from the chimney despite the growing heat. Let me do the talking, Daniel murmured as they approached. Catherine nodded against his back. He'd given her his hat to hide her distinctive auburn hair. But there was no disguising that she was a white woman riding with an Indian. That would draw attention no matter what. They dismounted, and Daniel noticed how Catherine stuck close to him as they entered the dim interior. The post smelled of leather, tobacco, and pickled goods. Behind the counter stood Jake Morrison, a grizzled former cavalry soldier who'd been running the post for as long as Daniel could remember. "Yazzie," Jake nodded, his eyes sliding to Catherine with obvious curiosity. "Been a while?" "Jake," Daniel set a silver dollar on the counter. "Need supplies, trail food, canteens, ammunition." "Sure thing." Jake's attention kept drifting to Catherine. "Ma'am." Catherine nodded, but said nothing, keeping her face shadowed by the hat brim. As Jake gathered supplies, Daniel heard familiar laughter from the back room where men often gathered to drink and play cards. His shoulders tensed. He knew that laugh. "That Tomas back there?" he asked casually. "Yeah, him and a few others. Came in yesterday looking for someone." Jake's eyes were shrewd. "A woman. Matter of fact, red-headed woman who might be traveling alone. Said she's touched in the head. Needs to be brought back to her family for her own good." Daniel felt Catherine go rigid beside him. "I haven't seen anyone like that," Daniel said evenly. "Didn't think you had." Jake wrapped their supplies in an oilcloth. "Just thought you should know what kind of men are drinking in my back room." The message was clear. Jake wasn't buying the story either, but he wasn't getting involved. Daniel had just picked up the supplies when the back door swung open. Thomas Brennan stepped out, followed by two other men who looked like they'd been hired for their guns rather than their brains. Thomas was a bounty hunter who worked the territory, tracking down anyone for the right price. He and Daniel had crossed paths before, never pleasantly. Well, Daniel Yazzie." Thomas's eyes were already whiskey-bright despite the early hour. "And who's this?" "My business," Daniel said. "Everything's everybody's business out here. Friend." Thomas stepped closer, trying to get a better look at Catherine. "Ma'am, you all right, this Indian bothering you?" Catherine surprised Daniel by stepping forward and speaking in a voice he hadn't heard before, cultured, with a slight Boston accent. "I'm quite well, thank you. My husband and I are simply purchasing supplies." "Husband?" The word hung in the air like smoke. Thomas's eyes narrowed. "Husband? You're married to this—" "Yes." Catherine lifted her chin. "Is that a problem?" "Might be, if you're the woman some folks are looking for. Red hair, green eyes, about your height." "Lots of women fit that description." Daniel interrupted. "We're done here." He started for the door, Catherine beside him, but Tomas moved to block their path. "Hold on now. I'm being paid good money to find a certain Mrs. Harold Whitman. Wouldn't want to let her slip by if she's standing right in front of me." Daniel saw Catherine flinch at the name. So that was it. She was married, running from her husband. "And never heard of her," Daniel said. His hand drifted to his gun belt. "Now move, or what you'll shoot me in Jake's store." Tomas grinned, showing tobacco-stained teeth. "I don't think so. Besides, if this lady really is your wife, she won't mind answering a few questions." The tension in the room ratcheted up another notch. Jake had retreated behind his counter, ready to duck if lead started flying. The two men with Tomas spread out slightly, hands near their weapons. Then Catherine did something that shocked everyone. She laughed a light, tinkling sound that seemed wildly out of place. "Oh, this is ridiculous," she said in that same cultured voice. "Do I look like someone who needs rescuing, Thomas? Is it—" "Tomas," the bounty hunter corrected, thrown off balance. "Thomas, let me be perfectly clear. I don't know this Mrs. Whitman you're searching for, but I feel sorry for her if her husband has hired men like you to drag her back." She moved closer to Daniel, sliding her arm through his. "Now, my husband and I have a long ride ahead. Good day, gentlemen." She sailed past Thomas like a Boston society lady leaving a disappointing tea party. Daniel followed, fighting the urge to grin at the bounty hunter's stunned expression. They made it to the horse before Tomas found his voice. "This isn't over. Yazzie, if I find out you're lying, you know where to find me." Daniel called back. He swung up onto the paint and pulled Catherine up behind him. As they rode out, he felt her trembling against his back. "Keep holding on," he said quietly. "Don't look back." They rode hard for an hour, following a trail that wound up into the rocky hills above Bitter Springs. Only when Daniel was sure they weren't being followed did he slow the horse and guide them into a hidden canyon he'd used before. Catherine slid off the horse and immediately bent over, hands on her knees, breathing hard. "I think I'm going to be sick," she managed. "You did good back there," Daniel said, dismounting. "Real good. Where'd that Boston lady voice come from?" "It's my voice, my real voice." She straightened, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. "I've been trying to talk like a frontier woman, but—" She shrugged. "Harold Whitman," Daniel said. "Your husband." Catherine's face closed off. "Was not anymore. The law might disagree." "The law?" She laughed bitterly. "The law says a man can do whatever he wants to his wife. Beat her, lock her away, take everything she owns. The law is why I ran." Daniel studied her, noting the way she hugged herself, the defensive hunch of her shoulders. He'd seen that posture before, in horses that had been mistreated. "He hurt you," he said. "It wasn't a question. Among other things." Catherine met his eyes. "Are you going to turn me in? There's probably a reward." "If I wanted to turn you in, I'd have done it back there." "Then why didn't you—" Daniel unsaddled the horse, giving himself time to think. Why was he helping her? The smart answer was still to leave her at the next settlement and ride on. But something held him back. "You said you knew my mother," Catherine said suddenly. "Back at the creek, you mentioned her." Daniel's hands stilled on the saddle. "What?" "When you said your mother raised you right, the way you said it, like she was gone." Catherine moved closer. "Mary Yazzie, was that her name?" The saddle slipped from Daniel's numb fingers. "How do you know that name?" "She saved my life," Catherine said simply. 2 years ago, I was very sick. Harold had locked me in our house after I tried to leave him the first time. He told everyone I'd gone to visit family, but really I was—" She swallowed hard. "I was dying, from lack of food, water, from despair. The doctor wouldn't come. Harold told him I was having female hysteria and needed isolation." Daniel sank down on a rock, his legs suddenly unsteady. "My mother worked as a healer sometimes, for the whites in Flagstaff. Yes, she came to the house to deliver herbs for the cook. Heard me crying through the walls. She bullied her way in, told Harold that if his wife died, the whole town would know why." Catherine's eyes were distant, remembering. "She nursed me back to health, stayed for 3 weeks, sleeping on the floor by my bed. She told me stories about her son who wandered between 2 worlds, never quite fitting in either. She talked about me." Daniel's voice came out rough. "All the time. She worried about you, said you carried too much anger, too much loneliness." Catherine sat down across from him. "She made me promise that if anything happened to her, I'd find a way to let you know she loved you, that she understood why you stayed away. She said the reservation was killing your spirit, but she never blamed you for leaving." Daniel put his head in his hands. He'd been hunting mustangs when his mother died. Hadn't made it back in time to say goodbye. The guilt had been eating at him for 2 years. "She left something for you," Catherine continued. "Hid it before she died. She told me where, made me memorize it. I've been trying to find you ever since I ran from Harold, but the territory is vast, and a woman alone—" "What did she leave?" "Her journal, and something else she wouldn't say what, just that you'd understand when you saw it." Catherine pulled a worn piece of paper from her bodice. She drew this map, said you'd know the place. Daniel took the paper with shaking hands. It was his mother's sketching. All right, he'd recognize it anywhere. The landmark she'd drawn was Sleeping Bear Rock, a place they'd picnicked when he was a boy, before everything got complicated. Why didn't you tell me this at the creek? I was terrified. A strange man. Finding me like that. I didn't know if you were really her son or just someone who'd hurt me. Catherine's voice dropped. I've learned not to trust easily. They sat in silence, the desert heat building around them. Daniel's mind reeled. His mother had saved this woman, had trusted her with a final message. It changed everything. We'll go get it, he said finally. Whatever she left, Sleeping Bear Rock is 3 days from here. What about Tomas? He'll follow. Let him. I know these hills better than any bounty hunter. Daniel stood, suddenly decisive. But first, we need to change your appearance. That red hair is too distinctive. Catherine touched her hair self-consciously. What do you suggest? My grandmother used to make dye from black walnuts. There's a grove not far from here. He paused. If you're willing. I'd dye it purple if it meant staying free, Catherine said firmly. Despite everything, Daniel smiled. Black will do. Come on, we've got work to do before we can visit my mother's secret. As they prepared to ride deeper into the wilderness, Daniel felt the chains of his guilt beginning to loosen. His mother had sent this woman to him. He believed that now. Maybe it was her way of taking care of him, even from beyond. Thank you, he said suddenly, for keeping your promise to her. Catherine's smile was sad but genuine. She was the only person in years who treated me like I mattered. I owed her everything. She paused. She said you have her eyes. She was right. Daniel turned away, blinking hard. Somewhere out there. Thomas and Harold Whitman's money were hunting for them. But for now, in this moment, two damaged souls had found an unexpected connection through the memory of a Navajo healer who'd refused to let either of them face their demons alone. The desert stretched endlessly before them, full of dangers and possibilities, but for the first time in 2 years, Daniel didn't feel quite so alone in it. The black walnut dye had transformed Catherine's distinctive auburn hair to a deep brown, almost black in certain lights. She sat by their evening fire, running her fingers through the unfamiliar color while Daniel prepared their meal rabbit he'd snared earlier and flatbread cooked on hot stones. Stop fussing with it, he said without looking up. You'll get used to it. I look like a different person, Catherine murmured. That's the idea. They'd been traveling for 2 days toward Sleeping Bear Rock, moving carefully through hidden trails Daniel had learned as a boy. The landscape had shifted from red rock desert to higher country, with scattered pines and cooler nights. Tell me about her, Catherine said suddenly. Your mother? The real her, not just what I saw when she was healing me. Daniel's hand stilled on the rabbit. It was still hard to talk about her, but something about Catherine made it easier. Maybe because she'd known Mary Yazzie in those final years when Daniel had been absent. She was stubborn, he said finally. Stubborn as a mule when she thought she was right, which was most of the time. A smile tugged at his mouth. Used to drive my father crazy. He was traditional, wanted her to stay on the reservation, keep to the old ways. But she learned English, learned to read and write, said knowledge was power, and our people needed power more than they needed tradition. Is that why you speak English so well? She taught me young, made me practice even when the other boys mocked me for it. Daniel turned the rabbit on its spit. Said I'd need it someday. She was right, as usual. Catherine pulled her knees up to her chest. She talked about your father, too. Said he died when you were young. 12 winters old. The old pain flickered. Cavalry raid. They said our band was harboring hostiles, but we were just trying to survive. He died protecting the women and children while they escaped. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. But the memory was still sharp, his father's blood on the ground, his mother's keening cry, the smoke from burning hogans. After that, we moved closer to the white settlements. Mother said we had to adapt or die. Not everyone agreed.
Is that why you left?
Daniel was quiet for a moment, watching the fire. I left because I didn't fit anywhere. Too Navajo for the whites. Too white-thinking for many of my people. Mother understood. But it still hurt her when I stayed away.
She never stopped loving you,
Catherine said softly. When she was dying, she stopped, glancing at him uncertainly. Go on. She was at our house again. Harold had finally allowed her to come treat me for women's complaints. But she was the one who was sick by then, coughing up blood, though she tried to hide it. Catherine's eyes glistened. She made me sit with her one afternoon while Harold was gone, told me about you, about where to find you when she passed, made me memorize everything. Why trust a white woman she barely knew? Catherine was quiet for so long, Daniel thought she wouldn't answer. Then she said she saw something in me, a bird with broken wings. She called me, said broken things could heal stronger if given the chance. I think she wanted us to help each other. The rabbit was done. Daniel carved it, handed Catherine her portion. They ate in companionable silence while the stars emerged overhead. What will you do after we find what she left? Catherine asked eventually. Don't know. Daniel wiped his hands on his pants. What about you can't run from Harold Whitman forever? I can try. Her voice turned fierce. I'll never go back to him. Never. He's rich, powerful. His family owns half the silver mines in Colorado. He can afford to hire men like Tomas indefinitely. She set down her food, appetite gone. I shouldn't have dragged you into this. You didn't drag me anywhere. I made my choice. Daniel studied her face in the firelight. What did he do to you? Catherine wrapped her arms around herself.
Does it matter no one cared before?
I'm not no one. She looked at him then, really looked at him. And something passed between them, an understanding, maybe, or just recognition of shared pain. The first time he hit me was our wedding night, she said quietly. I'd said something that displeased him. After that, it got worse. He was careful, though, never where it would show, never where society might notice. Her voice dropped. The isolation was worse than the beatings. Locked in that house, no visitors allowed, no letters in or out. He told everyone I was delicate, needed rest. People believed him because why wouldn't they? He was Harold Whitman, pillar of society. Daniel's hands clenched. Among his people, a man who struck his wife would face the judgment of the clan mothers. But in the white world, a wife was property. Your mother was the only one who saw through it. Catherine continued. The only one who dared to challenge him, after she got me well enough to function. Harold banned her from the house, but she'd already taught me something important that I was worth saving. So you ran. 3 months ago, took what money I could find, some jewelry to sell, and left in the middle of the night. Made it as far as Albuquerque before his men nearly caught me. I've been running ever since. To find me. Catherine smiled sadly. That was the hope. Your mother made it sound like you'd help, but I know that was probably just the fever talking. A dying woman's wish. Maybe not, Daniel said. She usually knew what she was doing, even when it didn't make sense to anyone else. A coyote howled in the distance, answered by another. Catherine shivered despite the fire's warmth. You should sleep, Daniel said. Tomorrow we'll reach Sleeping Bear Rock. Will you tell me a story first? She flushed. Your mother used to tell me Navajo stories when I couldn't sleep. I know it's childish. It's not childish. Daniel settled back against his saddle. What kind of story? Something with a happy ending. He thought for a moment. All right, this is a story my grandmother told me, about first man and first woman and the stars. as he spoke, weaving the ancient tale. He watched Catherine's face relax, the tension leaving her shoulders. She curled on her side, using her folded dress as a pillow, eyes growing heavy.
By the time he finished, she was asleep.
Daniel sat watching her, rifle across his knees, in the firelight, with her newly dark hair and sun-touched skin from days of travel. She could almost pass for a Mexican woman or even mixed blood. The thought gave him an idea. If Harold Whitman was looking for his red-haired Boston wife, maybe the answer was to make sure that woman no longer existed. The next morning brought clouds rolling in from the west, promising rain. They broke camp quickly, both eager to reach Sleeping Bear Rock before the weather turned. The landmark rose from the high desert like its namesake, a massive red rock formation that, from the right angle, looked like a bear curled in sleep. Daniel hadn't been here in years, but the sight of it brought back a flood of memories. His mother spreading a blanket for picnics, teaching him to identify plants, telling him stories of their ancestors.
"It's beautiful,"
Catherine breathed. She loved it here, said it was where earth and sky met. Daniel dismounted, helped Catherine down. The map shows a spot near the base, where the rocks form a natural shelter. They searched for an hour before Catherine called out,
"Here, I think this is it."
Daniel hurried over. She'd found a crevice in the rock face, barely visible unless you knew to look. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth and protected from the elements, was a leather satchel. Daniel's hands trembled as he pulled it out. Inside was his mother's journal, the one she'd kept for as long as he could remember. Beneath it, wrapped in soft doeskin, was something that made his throat close up.
"What is it?"
Catherine asked gently. "My father's medicine bundle." Daniel cradled it carefully. It should have been burned with him, but Mother, she saved it, kept it all these years. He opened the journal, recognizing his mother's careful handwriting. The last entries were shaky, obviously written when she was very ill. His eyes caught his name. "My son," he read aloud. "If you are reading this, then Catherine found you as I prayed she would. She is a good woman who has suffered much. Help her as her kind would not help me when your father died, and I was alone with a young son. Show her that there is still kindness in this hard world." Catherine made a soft sound. Daniel continued reading. "I have watched you struggle between two worlds, my beloved son. But perhaps that is your strength, not your weakness. Perhaps you were meant to build bridges, not walls. Catherine needs a protector. Yes, but you need to remember how to trust, how to care for someone besides yourself. In helping her, find your way back to who you were meant to be." The next part was in Navajo, meant only for him. Private words of love, of forgiveness, of hope. Daniel had to stop reading, overwhelmed. "There's more," Catherine said softly, pointing to another wrapped bundle in the satchel. Inside was a smaller journal and documents. Daniel frowned as he examined them. "These are copies of territorial records," he said slowly. "Marriage certificates, death notices. Why would she?" He stopped, understanding flooding through him. "What is it?" "She was building a new identity. Look, marriage certificate for one Maria Yazzie to Thomas Moore, dated 15 years ago. Death certificate for Thomas Moore from consumption 5 years later. Birth record for a daughter." He looked up at Catherine. "She was creating a past for you. A half-blood widow named Catherine Moore, not the missing white wife of Harold Whitman." Catherine's eyes widened.
"But how could she know I'd need—"
"Because she knew you'd run eventually. She saw it in you, the same way she saw things in everyone." Daniel shuffled through more papers. Travel permits, trading licenses, even a letter of introduction from a priest in Santa Fe. It's all here. A complete identity. "I don't understand. How could she do all this while she was dying?" Daniel smiled, remembering. She had friends everywhere. People she'd helped over the years, Indians, Mexicans, even some whites. She must have called in every favor. He found a letter at the bottom. sealed with wax. This one's addressed to you. Catherine took it with shaking hands, broke the seal. As she read, tears streamed down her face. What does it say? She handed it to him wordlessly, in his mother's shaking script. My dear Catherine, if you are reading this, then you have found your courage and my son. I have given you what I could, a new past, a chance at a different future, but papers are just paper. It is the choices we make that define us. Choose to be brave, choose to trust, choose to love, even when the world has given you every reason not to. My son is a good man who has forgotten his own goodness. Perhaps you can help each other remember. Be the daughter I never had. Let him be the protector you need, in the old way. Family is made by choice as much as blood. Choose each other. Mary Yazzie. Thunder rumbled overhead. The first fat raindrops began to fall. We should find shelter, Daniel said, his voice rough. They gathered everything and hurried to a protected overhang just as the skies opened. Huddled together, watching the rain pour down, they were quiet for a long time. Your mother was extraordinary, Catherine finally said.
Yes, she was.
What do we do now? Daniel looked at the document spread before them, one woman's gift to two lost souls. His mother had been right. As usual, he had been drifting, angry at the world, belonging nowhere. And Catherine had been running with no destination, no hope beyond survival. But together they might build something new. Now, he said slowly, we decide. Do we stay Catherine Moore and Daniel Yazzie, two people thrown together by circumstance, or do we become what my mother envisioned, a family of choice? Catherine met his eyes steadily. What do you want? What did he want for the first time in years? Daniel knew the answer. I want to stop wandering, he admitted. I want to build something that lasts, and I want... He paused, then pushed forward. I want to honor my mother's wisdom. She saw what we could be to each other before we did. A broken bird and a lost warrior, Catherine said softly. Healing each other? Is that so impossible? The rain pounded harder, sealing them in their stone shelter. Catherine moved closer to him, and Daniel put his arm around her. It felt natural, right? No, she said, not impossible at all. As they sat together, watching the storm transform the desert, Daniel felt something shift inside him. His mother's death had left him adrift, but even in dying, she'd thrown him a lifeline in the form of this remarkable woman. The storm would pass. Thomas and Harold Whitman's men would keep searching. There would be challenges ahead. But for now, in this sacred place where his mother had planned their meeting, two wounded souls began the slow process of choosing each other, just as Mary Yazzie had hoped they would. The dust cloud on the horizon meant riders, and riders meant trouble. Daniel spotted them first, pulling Catherine behind a cluster of boulders overlooking the valley they'd been crossing. 3 days had passed since Sleeping Bear Rock. 3 days of careful travel toward the small settlement of Cedar Ridge where Daniel hoped to establish Catherine's new identity. How many? Catherine whispered, though the riders were still a mile off. 4, maybe 5. Daniel squinted against the afternoon sun. Moving fast, like they're tracking something. Us? Maybe. He studied their path. Or maybe just passing through, but we can't risk it. They waited, pressed against the warm rock, as the riders drew closer. Daniel's hand rested on his rifle, ready but hoping he wouldn't need it. Then he caught a glimpse of the lead rider's face and cursed under his breath. What is it? Edward Bradston. I'd know that gray stallion anywhere. Daniel had encountered Bradston before the man was Harold Whitman's brother-in-law, and nearly as mean as they came. Looks like your husband called in family. Catherine's face went pale beneath her sun-darkened skin. Edward's worse than Harold. Smarter, too. He won't be fooled by hair dye and a change of clothes. The riders had stopped at a creek below, watering their horses. Their voices carried on the still air. Trail goes cold here, one man was saying. Could have gone any direction. She's with that Indian. Edward's cultured voice was sharp with authority. The one from Bitter Springs. Find him. We find her.
Yazzy's got family up near Window Rock.
Another voice offered. Could be heading there. No. Edward sounded certain. He's too smart to lead us to his people. He'll go somewhere else. Somewhere he thinks we won't follow. Daniel felt Catherine trembling beside him. He touched her arm gently. A silent reassurance. Check the trading posts. Edward continued. Every settlement between here and the Colorado line. $50 gold to whoever finds them. $100 if you bring her back breathing. What about the Indian? I don't care what happens to him. Long as she's unharmed, Harold wants his property returned in working condition. Property. The word made Daniel's jaw clench. Among his people, women were respected, had their own power and choices. This white man's way of thinking turned his stomach. The riders mounted up and continued east, away from Daniel and Catherine's position. They waited another hour before Daniel deemed it safe to move. They're heading the wrong direction, Catherine said hopefully. For now. But Edward's right, I am too smart to go to my people. Which means we need somewhere else. Daniel helped her down from the rocks. There's an old Spanish mission about 2 days south, abandoned mostly, but Father Miguel still tends it. He might help us. A Catholic priest, would he help a runaway wife? Miguel's not like most priests. He's helped plenty of people who needed it. No questions asked. Daniel whistled softly for his horse, who'd been ground-tied in a nearby arroyo. But we'll have to move carefully. Edward's got men watching the main trails. They traveled by night after that, resting during the heat of the day in whatever shelter they could find. Daniel taught Catherine how to move silently, how to read the land for signs of other travelers, how to find water in seemingly barren places. You're a good teacher, she said one evening as they shared a meal of dried meat and wild onions he'd found. Had a good teacher myself, my uncle, Hosteen Begay. He taught me to hunt before I could properly ride. Daniel smiled at the memory. Used to say I asked too many questions for a proper warrior. Do you miss it, your family, your people? Every day. The admission came easier now. But I made my choice. The reservation was... It was dying. Slowly, but dying. Traditional ways forbidden. Children sent to white schools. Proud warriors reduced to begging for government rations. I couldn't watch it anymore. So you left. So I left. He poked at their small fire. Thought I could make my own way. Belonged to neither world but surviving in both. Turns out that's a lonely path. Catherine moved closer to him. Over the past days, they developed an easy intimacy born of shared danger and growing trust. Maybe you don't have to walk it alone anymore. He looked at her then, really looked at her. The frightened woman from the creek was still there, but tempered now by growing strength. She'd adapted to the harsh travel without complaint, learned what he taught her with quick intelligence. His mother had seen her potential truly. Catherine, he began, then stopped. How could he explain what he was feeling? This connection that went beyond mere protection or obligation. I know, she said softly. I feel it too. Before he could respond, a sound made them both freeze horses, moving through the darkness toward their camp. The fire, Catherine breathed. Too late to douse it without drawing more attention. Daniel grabbed his rifle, pushing Catherine behind him. Stay down. If something happens, take the horse and run. I'm not leaving you. Catherine. No, her voice was steel. I'm done running alone. The horses came into view, 2 riders, moving cautiously. Daniel's finger found the trigger, but something made him wait. The lead rider called out in Spanish. We mean no harm. Friends. We saw your fire and thought to share it. The night is cold for old bones. Daniel answered in the same language. Show yourselves slowly. Two men rode into the firelight, an elderly Mexican and a younger man who might have been his son. Their clothes were worn but clean. Their horses pack animals rather than riding stock. Traders, maybe, or pilgrims. "I am Joaquin Morales," the older man said, dismounting carefully. "This is my grandson, Pablo. We're heading to Father Miguel's mission for the Feast of San Francisco." Daniel relaxed slightly but kept his rifle ready. "The mission is 2 days south." "Sigh, and these old bones feel every mile." Joaquin smiled, his weathered face kind. "Might we share your fire? We have food to contribute Maria's tamales, the best in Sonora." Daniel glanced at Catherine, who nodded slightly. "All right, but keep your hands where I can see them." The two men settled by the fire, producing not only tamales but a flask of good tequila. As they ate, Joaquin told stories of his travels, his voice soothing in the night. Pablo said little but watched everything with intelligent eyes. "You're heading to Father Miguel too?" Joaquin asked eventually. "Maybe," Daniel said carefully. "Ah." The old man's eyes twinkled. "He helps many who need sanctuary. No questions, just open doors." He glanced at Catherine. "Your wife." Catherine started to shake her head, but Daniel spoke first. "Yes. A recent blessing. I think you have the look of new love about you." Joaquin smiled. "My Maria and I were the same. Many years ago. Her father didn't approve I was just a poor vaquero, but love finds a way." "No." "Yes," Catherine said softly. "It does." They talked until late, the old man's presence oddly comforting. When it came time to sleep, Joaquin and Pablo rolled up in their blankets on one side of the fire, while Daniel and Catherine took the other. "Thank you," Catherine whispered, "for saying I'm your wife." "Seemed safer," Daniel replied, but that wasn't the whole truth, and they both knew it. In the morning, Joaquin invited them to travel together to the mission. "Safety in numbers," he said, "and I think you have the look of people who need Father Miguel's particular kind of help." Daniel wanted to refuse, but something about the old man inspired trust. They broke camp together, riding south through increasingly rough terrain. It was Pablo who spotted the dust cloud behind them, riders coming fast. "Friends of yours?" Joaquin asked mildly. "No," Daniel said grimly. "Enemies." "Ah." The old man didn't seem surprised. "Then we must hurry. The mission is close, and Father Miguel has ways of discouraging unwelcome visitors." They pushed the horses harder, but the riders were gaining. Daniel counted 5 men, likely Edward's group having doubled back somehow. "There," Pablo pointed ahead to where adobe walls rose from the desert floor. "The mission of San Francisco de Asís, centuries old and still standing." A bell began to ring as they approached. Someone had spotted them and their pursuers. The massive wooden gate swung open, and a brown-robed figure emerged. "Quickly," Father Miguel called. "Inside, all of you." They thundered through the gates just as the first shots rang out. Daniel wheeled his horse, ready to fight, but Father Miguel grabbed his arm. "No violence on holy ground," the priest said firmly. "I'll handle this." Edward Bradston and his men pulled up just outside the gates, dust swirling around them. Edward's face was red with fury and hard riding. "Father," he called, trying for politeness. "We're looking for a woman, a white woman who was kidnapped by that Indian. We're here to rescue her." Father Miguel stepped forward, and Daniel saw why the priest commanded respect despite his small stature. There was steel in his spine and fire in his eyes. "I see no kidnapped woman here," Miguel said calmly. "I see travelers seeking sanctuary, which this mission provides to all who need it." "She's my sister-in-law," Edward pressed. "Catherine Whitman, red hair, though it might be dyed now. She's not well. Father needs to be returned to her family for proper care." "The woman with us has dark hair and is clearly of mixed blood," Father Miguel said. "Perhaps you're mistaken." "I'm not mistaken." Edward's hand drifted toward his gun. "And you're harboring a fugitive." "I'm harboring souls in need of God's grace." The priest's voice hardened. "And you're threatening violence on church ground. I suggest you move on before I send word to Fort Union about armed men harassing a mission." "This isn't over," Edward snarled. "We'll be watching. She has to leave sometime." "Then you'll have a long wait. The mission offers sanctuary for as long as needed." Father Miguel stepped back. "Go in peace, my son. Or simply go." Edward stared for a long moment, then wheeled his horse around. "We'll be back," he called to Daniel, "with legal papers and the territorial marshal if necessary." The gates closed with a solid thud. Father Miguel turned to his unexpected guests, his stern expression melting into a warm smile. "Welcome to San Francisco de Asís. I think we have much to discuss." As they dismounted, Catherine caught Daniel's arm. "He'll never stop. Edward's worse than Harold for persistence." "Then we'll have to be smarter," Daniel said. "Father Miguel bought us time. Now we figure out how to use it." Looking at the high adobe walls surrounding them, Daniel felt both trapped and protected. They'd found sanctuary, but Edward was right, they couldn't stay here forever. In the bell tower above, a raven cawed, and Daniel remembered his grandmother's words. "When raven speaks at a crossroads, change is coming." Change was definitely coming. The question was whether they'd be ready for it. The mission of San Francisco de Asís was a world unto itself, with thick adobe walls that held the desert heat at bay and gardens where impossible things grew in the arid soil. Father Miguel led them through courtyards where fountains sang and ancient olive trees provided shade, their gnarled trunks testament to centuries of persistence. "You'll be safe here," the priest assured them as he showed them to a small adobe house within the compound. "Edward Bradston may rage outside our walls, but even he won't violate sanctuary, not if he wants to maintain any standing in the territory." The dwelling was simple but clean, 2 rooms with a shared fireplace, rough wooden furniture, and bright woven blankets on the beds. After weeks of sleeping on hard ground, it seemed luxurious. "Thank you, Father," Catherine said. "We won't impose on your kindness long. Stay as long as needed." Father Miguel's knowing eyes moved between them. "Though I suspect you have decisions to make that can't wait forever." That evening, after sharing a meal with the mission's small community of residents, mostly indigenous families and Mexican workers who tended the gardens, Daniel and Catherine sat in the courtyard watching the stars emerge. "He knows we're not really married," Catherine said quietly. "Father Miguel knows many things, but he also knows when not to ask questions." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "Does it bother you that I said you were my wife?" "No." She turned to look at him. "Does it bother you that I didn't correct you?" The question hung between them like the bright stars overhead. Over their journey, something had shifted. What had begun as protection and obligation had deepened into something Daniel couldn't quite name, or perhaps was afraid to name. "My mother's papers," he said finally. "They could make you Catherine Moore, widow, free to make your own choices. But that's just paper. What do you want to be?" Catherine was silent for so long he wondered if she'd answer. Then, "For 2 years with Harold, I was property, a thing to be owned, displayed, controlled. Before that, in Boston society, I was a commodity married off to secure my father's business dealings with the Whitman family." She drew a shaky breath. "I've never been allowed to choose what I want to be." "You can choose now." "Can I?" She gestured toward the walls. "Edward is out there somewhere. Harold won't stop until I'm dragged back or dead, even with new papers. What kind of life can I have, always looking over my shoulder, always afraid?" Daniel moved closer to her on the stone bench. "There might be another way." "What do you mean?" He'd been thinking about it all day, turning the idea over in his mind like a river stone. Marriage, real marriage, changes things legally. A wife belongs to her husband. Yes, but that means Harold has no claim if you're married to someone else. Catherine went very still. Are you proposing? I'm offering a solution. But even as he said it, Daniel knew it was more than that. Among my people, marriage can be many things. Partnership, protection. Sometimes love grows later. Sometimes it's there from the start, but always, it's a choice. And what would we be choosing? Daniel looked at her, really looked at her. The moonlight caught the angles of her face, and he saw not the frightened woman from the creek, but someone who'd grown stronger with each passing day. Someone who'd chosen to stop running. I don't know, he admitted. But maybe that's all right. Maybe we choose first and figure out the rest as we go. The way your mother wanted, Catherine said softly. She usually knew what she was doing. Catherine stood and walked to the fountain, trailing her fingers in the water. If we did this married, where would we go? How would we live? I've been thinking about that too. Daniel joined her. There's a town called Esperanza, 3 days west, mixed population Apache, Mexican, some whites, the kind of place where a half-blood woman and her Navajo husband wouldn't draw much attention. I know the sheriff there, Tom Delgado. He owes me a favor from years back. And Edward would have a harder time causing trouble in Esperanza. Delgado doesn't take kindly to outsiders throwing their weight around. Catherine turned to face him. You've thought this through? I've had nothing but time to think since we left Sleeping Bear Rock. He took her hands, noticed how they'd roughened from their travels. No longer the soft hands of a pampered wife. But thinking and doing are different things. This has to be your choice. Catherine, free and clear. And yours, she reminded him. Marriage to me means taking on my troubles. Harold won't give up easily. There could be violence. There's already been violence. Might be more whether we marry or not. Daniel squeezed her hands gently. I'm not afraid of Harold Whitman or his brother-in-law. What are you afraid of? The question caught him off guard. What was he afraid of for years? He'd lived without connections, without ties beyond the moment. Now here was this woman asking for something permanent? I'm afraid of failing you, he said honestly, of not being the man my mother thought I could be, of choosing wrong. Then we're both afraid. Catherine's smile was tremulous but real. Maybe that's all right too. Maybe being afraid together is better than being afraid alone. A bell rang somewhere in the mission evening prayers. The sound seemed to release something in the air between them. Yes, Catherine said simply. Yes. Yes, I'll marry you, choose you, whatever you want to call it. Her voice grew stronger. I choose to stop being Harold's runaway wife and start being whatever comes next. Daniel felt something loosen in his chest. A knot he hadn't known was there. Tomorrow. Why wait? We've been waiting our whole lives, haven't we? That night, they told Father Miguel their decision. The priest's weathered face creased in a knowing smile. I wondered when you'd come to this conclusion, he said. Your mother was a wise woman. Daniel, she saw what others missed. You knew my mother. She passed through here once, years ago. Helped birth a baby when our midwife was ill. We talked long into the night. Miguel's eyes grew distant with memory. She spoke of you, of her hopes that you'd find your way back to yourself. I think she'd be pleased. Will you marry us? Catherine asked. It would be my honor, but... The priest's expression grew serious. A Catholic marriage requires certain things. Baptism, for one, and the blessing of the church. I was baptized as a child, Catherine said. But Daniel... I follow the way of my people, Daniel said firmly. I won't pretend otherwise. Father Miguel nodded. I thought as much. But there's another way. Matrimonio por necesidad, marriage by necessity. The church recognizes it when circumstances require, and God sees the heart more clearly than doctrine sometimes allows. Is it legal? Catherine asked anxiously. Legal enough. And more importantly, it will be recorded in the church records. Copies sent to Santa Fe. Hard for anyone to dispute a marriage blessed by the church and recognized by the territory. They set the ceremony for the following evening, giving Father Miguel time to prepare and word to spread through the mission community. That night, Daniel and Catherine stayed in their separate rooms, tradition demanding distance before the wedding. But Daniel couldn't sleep. He stood at his window, looking out at the desert beyond the walls. Somewhere out there, Edward Bradston was planning his next move. Harold Whitman was paying men to hunt them down. The smart thing would be to keep running, to disappear into the vast territory and hope to stay hidden. Instead, tomorrow he would bind himself to this woman and all her troubles. Make her fights his fights. It should have felt like a trap. Instead, it felt like coming home. A soft knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. He opened it to find Joaquin, the old trader who'd shared their fire. "Forgive the late hour," Joaquin said, "but I have something for you. For tomorrow." He handed Daniel a small leather pouch. Inside was a ring simple silver set with a small turquoise stone. "It was my Maria's," Joaquin explained.
She passed last winter. She would want it to go to new love, to continue the circle.
"I can't accept this," Daniel protested. "You can and you will." The old man's eyes twinkled. "I saw how you looked at each other by the fire. That's real, what you have. Don't let anyone tell you different." After Joaquin left, Daniel held the ring up to the moonlight. The turquoise caught the light like a piece of captured sky. His people believed turquoise brought protection, harmony, connection between earth and sky. Tomorrow he would place it on Catherine's finger, and everything would change. The next evening, the mission's small chapel glowed with candlelight. The community had gathered Mexican families, Apache workers, even traveling traders who'd arrived that day. Catherine wore a simple white dress borrowed from one of the women, her dark dyed hair crowned with desert wildflowers. Daniel waited at the altar in his best shirt, the one he'd been saving rolled in his saddlebags. When Catherine entered, something shifted in his chest. This was right. His mother had known, somehow, that these two broken people could make each other whole. Father Miguel spoke the words in Spanish and English, adapting the traditional ceremony to fit their unusual circumstances. When it came time for the ring, Daniel produced Joaquin's gift. Catherine's eyes filled with tears as he slipped it onto her finger. "With this ring, I choose you," he said, departing from the traditional words. "Not from duty or necessity, but from my heart. You'll never run alone again." "And I choose you," Catherine replied. "Not from fear or desperation, but from hope. We'll face whatever comes together." When Father Miguel pronounced them married, the chapel erupted in celebration. The mission women had prepared a feast, and someone produced a guitar. Music filled the courtyard as Daniel and Catherine were swept into the celebration. "No regrets?" Catherine asked as they danced to a slow Spanish melody. "None," Daniel said, meaning it. "You—" "Only that your mother isn't here to see this." "She is," Daniel said with certainty. "Somewhere, she's smiling and saying, 'I told you so.'" Late that night, in their adobe house within the mission walls, Daniel and Catherine lay together as husband and wife. Outside, Edward Bradston might be plotting. Harold might be hiring more men. The world might be ready to tear them apart. But inside these walls, for this moment, they had chosen each other. And sometimes, in the harsh landscape of the territory, choosing was the greatest act of defiance. "What happens tomorrow?" Catherine asked sleepily. "We start our new life," Daniel said. "Mr. and Mrs. Yazzie heading for Esperanza to make a home." "I like the sound of that," she murmured against his chest. So did he, for the first time in years. Daniel Yazzie had something to protect besides himself, someone to build a future with. It should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like the first day of really living. The moon hung like a silver dollar over Cedar Creek. The same moon that had witnessed their first meeting. But now, 3 weeks after their marriage, Daniel and Catherine faced their greatest test yet. Edward Bradston had found them. They'd left the mission as planned, made it halfway to Esperanza before Daniel's instincts screamed danger. He'd trusted those instincts, veering off the main trail into a box canyon he knew from his wandering days. Now, with Edward's men closing in, that decision would either save or doom them. "How many?" Catherine whispered, checking the rifle Daniel had taught her to use. 8, maybe 10. Daniel peered through the rocks at the canyon entrance. Edward brought a small army. The marshal? Don't see one. Means Edward's doing this outside the law. Daniel's smile was grim. That works both ways. They'd fortified their position among the rocks near the creek, the very creek where they'd first met. The irony wasn't lost on Daniel. Their story had begun with water and moonlight. Now it might end the same way. "Catherine," Edward's voice echoed off the canyon walls. "I know you're up there. Come down peacefully and no one gets hurt. Harold's willing to forgive everything. Just come home." Catherine's laugh was bitter. "Forgive, he wants to forgive me." "Don't answer," Daniel warned. "Let them come to us." But Edward wasn't finished. "You've been deceived. Catherine, that savage doesn't care about you. He's using you for money, for status. Did he tell you about the reward $500 for your safe return? That's what you're worth to him." "He's lying," Daniel said quickly. "I know." Catherine touched his face. "I know who you are, Daniel Yazzie, and who you're not." "Last chance," Edward called. "Come down or we're coming up, and I can't guarantee your husband's safety if he resists." "Here they come," Daniel muttered, watching shadows detach from the rocks below. "Remember what I taught you. Short bursts, conserve ammunition. And Catherine, if something happens to me, nothing's going to happen to you." Her voice was steel. "We're both walking out of here." The first shots came without warning, pocking the rocks around them with sharp whines. Daniel returned fire, picking his targets carefully. These weren't all hardened gunmen. Some were just cowboys hired for easy money. He aimed to wound, not kill, when possible. Catherine fired beside him, steady and calm as he'd taught her. The woman who'd trembled in the creek had found her courage. "There!" She pointed to movement on their left flank. Daniel swung his rifle, caught a man trying to climb the rocks. The shot sent him tumbling back with a cry. "They're trying to surround us," Daniel said. "Time to move. Follow me. Stay low." They scrambled through the rocks, using paths Daniel had scouted earlier. "Behind them!" Edward's voice rose in fury. "Find them $50 bonus to whoever brings her down unharmed." They reached a secondary position, a cluster of boulders forming a natural fortress. But their ammunition was running low, and Daniel had counted at least 6 men still moving below. "Daniel?" Catherine's voice was strange. "I need to tell you something." "Now." In case we don't make it," she reloaded with shaking hands. "I love you. Not from gratitude or need or because your mother planned it. I love you for who you are, the man who gave me water in the desert, who taught me to be strong, who chose me when he could have ridden away." Daniel's throat closed. In all their time together, neither had spoken those words. "Catherine," a rifle cracked. Daniel felt the bullet tug at his shirt, missing flesh by inches. He spun and fired, dropping the shooter. "Save it for after," Catherine said with a shaky smile. "When we're safe in Esperanza." But safety seemed far away. More men were climbing, using cover expertly. Edward had hired well. Then Daniel heard a sound that made his blood run cold. Horses, lots of them, approaching fast. Reinforcements. They were finished. "I'm sorry," he told Catherine. "I failed you." "You never failed me. Not once." She gripped his hand. "Whatever happens." The horses burst into the canyon, But the war cries that filled the air weren't what Edward expected. Apache warriors, painted for battle, swept down on Edward's men like an avalanche.
What?
Catherine started. Friends, Daniel said in wonder. Old friends. The leader was Naichi, son of Cochise, whom Daniel had ridden with briefly in his wandering years. The Apache had no love for men like Edward Bradston, who represented everything destroying their way of life. The battle turned instantly. Edward's hired guns, faced with Apache warriors in full cry, broke and ran. Only Edward himself stood his ground, fury replacing fear on his aristocratic features. "You think this changes anything?" he shouted up at them. "I'll be back with the army with warrants. You'll hang for this. Yazzie." Naichi rode close to Edward. Lance pointed at his chest. He said something in Apache that Daniel translated. "The man says you should leave now. Don't come back. The desert has many ways to swallow men who don't belong." Edward's face went pale. He backed toward his horse, eyes never leaving the Apache warriors. "This isn't over. Catherine, Harold won't give up. Ever." Then he was gone, spurring his gray stallion out of the canyon, his remaining men following in disorder. Naichi rode up to where Daniel and Catherine stood, his painted face split in a grin. "You always did find interesting trouble, my friend," he said in accented English. "Naichi," Daniel clasped his arm in the warrior way. "How?" "Father Miguel sent word, said you might need help reaching Esperanza. We were nearby, hunting." His eyes moved to Catherine with interest. "This is the woman who tamed Daniel Yazzie." "No one tames him," Catherine said. "We chose each other." "Ah," Naichi nodded approval. "That is better. Come, we'll escort you to Esperanza. Make sure no one follows." As they prepared to leave, Catherine caught Daniel's arm. "You were going to say something before the Apache arrived." Daniel looked at her, his wife, his partner, his unexpected salvation. "I was going to say I love you too. Have loved you since you stood in that creek, terrified but unbroken. Loved you more each day as you grew stronger. Love you now. Catherine Yazzie, and will until the mountains crumble." She kissed him then, there in the moonlight by the creek where it all began, while Apache warriors politely looked away, and the desert held its breath. They reached Esperanza 2 days later, riding in with an Apache escort that made quite an impression on the townspeople. Sheriff Tom Delgado, true to Daniel's memory, welcomed them without too many questions. "You planning to stay?" he asked over coffee in his office. "If you'll have us," Daniel said. "Town could use a good tracker. And Mrs. Yazzie, we've got children here who need teaching, if you're so inclined." Catherine's face lit up. "I was a governess once. Before, I'd love to teach again." "Then, welcome to Esperanza." Delgado slid a badge across the desk. "Deputy pay isn't much, but it's honest work, and that badge might discourage certain people from causing trouble." That night, in a small adobe house on the edge of town, Daniel and Catherine began their new life in earnest. The furniture was sparse, the walls needed whitewash, but it was theirs. "Edward was wrong," Catherine said as they lay together, listening to coyotes sing in the distance. "He'll be back." "Maybe, but we'll be ready. We've got the law on our side now, and friends." Daniel pulled her close. "And we've got each other." "The woman who never ran away again," Catherine murmured. "Your mother saw it all, didn't she? She had a gift for seeing what others missed." Daniel thought of the journal and medicine bundle, now safely stored in their new home, for bringing people together who needed each other. A week later, word came that Harold Whitman had died a heart attack. The message said, brought on by rage when he learned of Catherine's marriage. Edward had disappeared. Some said to California, others to Mexico. Either way, the threat had passed. "How do you feel?" Daniel asked when Catherine read the letter. She stood at their window,
watching the sun set over the desert. Free, she said simply. For the first time in my life. Truly free. That evening, she took him to a spot she'd found a small creek running behind their house, shaded by cottonwoods. The water ran clear and cold from mountain springs. Like our place, she said, where we began. They sat by the water as stars emerged overhead. Catherine had brought her husband's journal, the one Mary Yazzie had saved for him. Read to me, Daniel asked. I want to hear her words in your voice. So Catherine read while the moon rose full and bright. Passages about hope and love, about bridges between worlds, about the son she prayed would find his way home not to a place, but to a person who would help him remember who he was meant to be. When she finished, they sat in comfortable silence. Then Catherine stood and began unlacing her boots. What are you doing? Daniel asked. Something I should have done that first night. She pulled off her boots and stockings, then waded into the creek. Come on. Daniel joined her in the water, understanding. This was a cleansing, a circle completed. No more fear, no more running, no more hiding. Navajo warrior found her naked under the moonlight by the river, Catherine said softly, taking his hands. She never ran away again. Because she was home, Daniel finished. We both were. They stood in the moonlit water. Two souls who had found each other across impossible odds, brought together by a dying woman's wisdom and their own choices to trust, to love, to stay. In Esperanza, the town of Hope, Daniel and Catherine Yazzie began building their life together. The warrior who wandered between worlds had found where he belonged. The woman who ran had found where to stand and fight. And somewhere, beyond the veil between worlds, Mary Yazzie smiled and rested, her final work complete. 6 months had passed since the night battle at Cedar Creek, and Esperanza had become home in ways Daniel never expected. He walked the streets as deputy sheriff, keeping peace between miners, ranchers, and the mixed population that gave the town its character. Catherine taught at the small schoolhouse, her classroom filled with Apache, Mexican, and white children learning together something that raised eyebrows among some newcomers but was simply the way of Esperanza. This morning, Daniel found her in their garden, tending the roses she'd coaxed to life despite the desert climate. She moved carefully, one hand pressed to her lower back. You should rest, he said, kissing her temple. I'm pregnant, not fragile. But she smiled, leaning into him. Though I wouldn't mind help with the water bucket. 4 months along now. Their child growing beneath her heart. The news had filled Daniel with equal parts joy and terror. A father, he would be a father. Sometimes he woke at night, remembering his own father's death, wondering if he could protect this new family any better. Letter came, Catherine said, producing an envelope from her apron. From Boston. Daniel tensed. Letters from Catherine's past rarely brought good news. It's from my Aunt Margaret, she continued, breaking the seal. The only family who ever... She trailed off, reading. Her face went pale. What is it? She's coming here, to visit. Catherine looked up, stricken. She doesn't know about Harold's death, about you, about any of it. She still thinks I'm... She stopped, hand moving protectively to her belly. When? 2 weeks. She's already on her way. Catherine sank onto the garden bench. Oh, Daniel, Aunt Margaret practically raised me after Mother died. I can't turn her away. But how do I explain a proper Boston lady finding her niece married to a savage? His voice came out harder than intended. That's not what I meant. But it's what she'll think. Daniel sat beside her, working to control old anger. Maybe it's better if I'm not here when she arrives. Don't you dare. Catherine gripped his hand. You're my husband. This is our home. If Aunt Margaret can't accept that, then she's not the woman I remember. But Daniel saw the worry in her eyes.
Catherine had given up everything for their life together, her race's approval, her social standing, any chance of returning to the world she'd known. Now that world was coming to their door. 2 weeks later, the stage from Santa Fe rolled into Esperanza, dust-covered and creaking. Daniel stood with Catherine outside the depot, wearing his best shirt and the deputy's badge polished bright. Catherine had insisted on meeting her aunt together, presenting a united front. The woman who descended from the stage was smaller than Daniel expected, gray-haired and travel-worn, but with sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. Margaret Hartwell, 70 years old and still formidable. Those sharp eyes found Catherine immediately, took in the simple calico dress, the sun-darkened skin, the obvious pregnancy. Then they moved to Daniel the badge, the gun, the Navajo features. Oh. "Catherine," she said simply. "Aunt Margaret." Catherine stepped forward, chin raised. "I'd like you to meet my husband, Daniel Yazzie." A heartbeat of silence. Then Margaret Hartwell did something unexpected. She smiled. "About time you wrote," she said, embracing Catherine carefully. "Though I had to hear from the lawyers about Harold's passing. Weak heart, they said." Her eyes glinted. "Weak everything, if you ask me." She turned to Daniel, extending a gloved hand. "Mr. Yazzie, I hope you're taking better care of my niece than her first husband did." Daniel shook her hand, surprised by the firm grip. "I try, ma'am." "Good. Now, where can an old woman get out of this heat in Catherine? We need to talk about why you're doing manual labor in your condition. Don't think I didn't notice those calluses." As they walked to the house, Daniel caught Catherine's amazed expression. This wasn't the reaction either of them had expected. Over tea in their small parlor, the story came out. Margaret listened without interrupting as Catherine explained everything: Harold's cruelty, her escape, meeting Daniel, their marriage. "I knew," Margaret said when Catherine finished. "Oh, not the details, but I knew Harold Whitman was no good. Tried to tell your father, but he was blinded by business prospects." She sipped her tea. "When you disappeared, I hired investigators. They found nothing, but I hoped you'd found freedom somehow." "Why didn't you say something before?" Catherine asked. "Before the wedding." "Because your father had legal authority, and I was just a spinster aunt with no standing." Margaret's proper facade cracked, showing real pain. "I've regretted my silence every day since." "It's not your fault," Catherine said softly. "Perhaps not, but I could have done more." Margaret turned to Daniel. "You saved her when her own family failed. For that, you have my eternal gratitude." "She saved herself," Daniel said. "I just helped a little." Margaret studied him with those sharp eyes. "A lawman. Your mother would be proud." Daniel started. "You knew my mother?" "Mary Yazzie. I met her once, years ago. She came to Boston with a missionary group, speaking about education for Native children." Margaret smiled at the memory. "Brilliant woman. Gave the society ladies quite a shock with her views on female independence. We corresponded a few times after." The world suddenly seemed smaller. Daniel exchanged glances with Catherine, remembering his mother's hidden hand in bringing them together. "Now," Margaret said briskly, "let's discuss practicalities. I've brought some things from Boston, family items that belong to Catherine. And there's the matter of your father's estate. My dear." "Father's estate?" Catherine frowned. "He disowned me when I married Harold against his wishes. He threatened to, but he never changed his will. When he died last year, everything went to you as his only child." Margaret produced legal documents from her valise. "The house is sold, but there's money. Quite a bit. Actually, enough to build a proper life wherever you choose." Catherine stared at the papers. We don't need..." "Take it," Margaret said firmly. "Use it for the child. For the future. Your father owed you that much." Over the next days,
Margaret settled into Esperanza life with surprising ease. She visited Catherine's classroom, charming the children with stories of faraway Boston. She helped in the garden, proving unexpectedly knowledgeable about desert plants. She even accompanied Daniel on his rounds one day, observing the town he protected. "You've done well here," she told him that evening. "Both of you built something real." But Daniel sensed she had more to say. It came that night, when Catherine was sleeping and he found Margaret on the porch, watching the stars. "I'll be leaving soon," she said. "But first, I need to know, will you always take care of her even when it's hard, even when the world tells you you're wrong for each other?" "Always," Daniel said without hesitation. "Good." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "I had a love once. A man my father didn't approve of, Irish, Catholic, poor. I let them talk me out of it. Chose propriety over passion." She looked at him. "I've lived with that choice for 50 years. Don't let anyone make you doubt what you have." "No one could," Daniel said. "You say that now, but there will be times. When the baby comes, when people stare, when doors close because of what you are together. Promise me you'll remember that love is stronger than prejudice." "I promise." Margaret nodded, satisfied. "Then I can leave happy, knowing Catherine finally has the life she deserves." She departed 3 days later, but not before surprising them one last time. She'd used her connections to establish a trust for the baby's education, and she'd ordered books for Catherine's school enough to fill proper shelves. "I'll visit again," she promised, embracing them both at the stage depot. "After the baby comes, someone needs to ensure you're raising my great-nephew or niece properly." As the stage rolled away, Catherine leaned against Daniel. "I never expected that," she admitted. "Your aunt's a remarkable woman." "All the best women in my life have been." She looked up at him. "Your mother, Aunt Margaret. They saw what others missed, that love doesn't follow society's rules." That evening, they sat on their porch as the sun set. The town spread before them Esperanza, their hope made real. Daniel felt the baby kick against his palm where it rested on Catherine's belly. "Strong already," he murmured. "Like the father," Catherine said. Then, more quietly, "I've been thinking about names. If it's a girl—" "Mary," Daniel said immediately. "For my mother." "I was hoping you'd say that." Catherine smiled. "Mary Margaret Yazzie. A name with history." "And if it's a boy—" Catherine was quiet. Then, "James, for your father, so he won't be forgotten." Daniel's throat closed. His father, killed defending his people. His son, who would grow up in a different world, still challenging, but with more possibilities. "Perfect," he managed. Inside the house, Aunt Margaret's gifts waited: books and learning, tools for building bridges between worlds. Outside, Esperanza settled into evening, a town where Apache and Mexican and white lived in relative peace, where a Navajo deputy kept the law, where children of all colors learned together. Not perfect. Nothing was perfect. But it was theirs, built on choice and love and the courage to stay when running would have been easier. "No regrets?" Catherine asked, their evening ritual. "None," Daniel replied, meaning it. "You?" "Only one." She traced the turquoise ring on her finger. "That your mother isn't here to see how right she was." "She knows," Daniel said. "Somehow, she knows." A coyote called in the distance, answered by its pack. The desert sang its evening song, and in Esperanza, two people who'd found home in each other faced the future together, no longer running, no longer afraid. The woman who'd stood naked and terrified in moonlit water had become someone new: teacher, wife, soon-to-be mother. The warrior who'd wandered between worlds had found where he belonged. And somewhere, in whatever lies beyond, Mary Yazzie and Margaret Hartwell might have raised ghostly teacups in satisfaction, two remarkable women whose faith in love had changed everything.
1 year had passed since that night at Cedar Creek when their story truly began. Now, on a similar evening with the same full moon rising, Daniel and Catherine Yazzie stood at the place where it all started, but this time, they weren't alone. Little Mary Margaret Yazzie, 6 months old, gurgled happily in her father's arms, reaching for the silver moon with chubby fingers. She had her mother's green eyes and her father's dark hair, a perfect blend of two worlds. "She loves the water," Catherine said, kneeling by the creek's edge to let the baby splash her tiny hands in the cool stream. "Just like her parents." Daniel smiled, remembering, "Seems like a lifetime ago, finding you here." It was a lifetime ago. We're different people now. Catherine stood, water droplets sparkling on her hands. Better people, I think. They'd come to place flowers on Mary Yazzie's grave, a pilgrimage they made each year. The cemetery overlooked the valley, a peaceful place where hawks circled and wildflowers grew between the stones. Catherine arranged the bouquet desert roses mixed with the cultivated blooms from her garden. "Your mother, your grandmother," Catherine whispered to the baby. "The woman who brought us together." Daniel traced his mother's name on the stone, weathered now, but still clear. Below it, they'd added words in both English and Navajo. She built bridges between worlds. As Catherine sang softly in Navajo morning songs Daniel had taught her, he reflected on the year past. Their daughter's birth had been difficult, requiring the skills of both the Mexican midwife and the traditional healer from the nearby Apache band. For hours, Daniel had paced outside, hearing Catherine's cries, praying to every power he knew. When Rosa, the midwife, finally placed the squalling infant in his arms, Daniel had wept. His daughter, their miracle. The town had embraced little Mary Margaret with surprising warmth. Perhaps it was her infectious smile, or perhaps Esperanza had simply grown more accepting. Either way, she'd become everyone's child bounced on the knees of gruff miners, sung to by Mexican grandmothers, given tiny moccasins by Apache visitors. "She's blessed," old Joaquin had said when he'd passed through last month. "A child of many peoples, she'll grow up belonging everywhere." Now, as they prepared to leave the cemetery, Daniel noticed fresh wheel tracks on the road below. A wagon, moving slow, heading toward town. His hand moved instinctively to his weapon. Old habits died hard. "Visitors?" Catherine asked, following his gaze. "Maybe. We'll take the back trail." They rode carefully into Esperanza. Mary Margaret secured against Catherine's chest in a cradleboard Daniel's cousin had sent. The streets seemed normal children playing, merchants hawking wares, the usual evening bustle. But at the sheriff's office, Tom Delgado waited with a grim expression. "Got a telegram," he said without preamble. "That wagon you probably saw government men, Bureau of Indian Affairs." Daniel's blood chilled. The Bureau meant trouble. Always. "What do they want?" "Don't know yet, but they asked about you specifically, about your family." Tom's eyes flicked to the baby. "Might be nothing, but it's never nothing with the Bureau," Daniel finished. At home, Catherine settled Mary Margaret while Daniel cleaned his rifle. They didn't speak, but both felt the shadow of old fears returning. They'd built something good here, something precious. Now outsiders threatened it. The knock came at sunset, polite but insistent. Daniel opened the door to find 2 men in dark suits despite the heat. Government men, definitely. Mr. Yazzie. The older one, gray-bearded and official, consulted papers. "Mr. Daniel Yazzie, formerly of the Navajo Reservation." "I'm Daniel Yazzie. What's this about?" "I'm James Morrison from the Bureau. This is my associate, Mr. Carr. May we come in?" Daniel wanted to refuse, but Catherine appeared beside him. "Please, come in. Would you like some coffee?" Always the proper hostess. Even now, The men entered, eyes cataloging everything, the mix of Navajo weavings and Boston furniture, the books, the cradle in the corner. "You've done well for yourself," Morrison observed. Deputy sheriff, property owner. Quite unusual for... He paused delicately. For an Indian. Daniel's voice was flat. For anyone from the reservation system. Morrison shuffled his papers. "Which brings us to our purpose. There's a new initiative, the Carlisle model, taking Native children to boarding schools, giving them proper education, Christian values, helping them integrate into civilized society." Catherine's hand found Daniel's. They'd heard of Carlisle, where Indian children had their hair cut, their languages forbidden, their names changed. "Our daughter is 6 months old," Catherine said evenly. "Rather young for school." "Oh, not now," Morrison assured her. "But we're identifying candidates for future enrollment. Mixed-blood children especially, they adapt more easily." He smiled, apparently thinking this was reassuring. Young Mary would receive the finest education, opportunities she'd never have otherwise. "No," the word came out harder than Daniel intended. Morrison's eyebrows rose. "I understand your reluctance, but consider your daughter's future. Growing up between worlds is difficult. At Carlisle, she'd learn to succeed in American society." "She is succeeding," Catherine said. "She has parents who love her, a community that welcomes her, a future full of possibilities." "But surely you see the limitations. A half-breed child, forgive the term, faces obstacles. We can help her overcome her heritage." Daniel stood. "I think you should leave." Mr. Yazzie, please be reasonable." "Leave now." Morrison gathered his papers, but his expression had hardened. "This isn't a request, Mr. Yazzie. The Bureau has authority over Indian children. We're trying to be civilized about this, but the law is clear." "My daughter is also white," Catherine said coldly. "My family has connections in Boston, in Washington. Touch her, and you'll face more than frontier law." The threat of Eastern influence made Morrison pause. "We'll be in town a few days. Please reconsider. For the child's sake." After they left, Daniel pulled Catherine close, feeling her tremble. "They can't take her. I won't let them." "The law," Catherine whispered. "What if the law?" "Then we'll go beyond the law. To Mexico, maybe, or deeper into Apache territory." He cupped her face. "Remember what I told you that night at the creek. You'll never run alone again. That goes for all of us now." But Catherine surprised him. The fear in her eyes shifted to something else, determination. The same look she'd had facing down Edward Bradston. "No," she said. "No more running. This is our home, our daughter's home. We stand and fight." The next morning, Esperanza buzzed with tension. Word had spread about the Bureau men, and opinions divided sharply. Some whites thought education would help Mary Margaret. Others resented government interference. The Mexican families remembered their own struggles to keep their children. The few Apache who traded in town spoke of cousins vanished to distant schools, returning as strangers if at all. Sheriff Delgado called a town meeting. In the packed hall, voices rose in argument until Father Miguel, visiting from his mission, called for quiet. "The question," the priest said, "is not about education or civilization. It's about family, about who decides a child's future parents who love her, or distant bureaucrats who see her as a problem to solve." "The law's the law," someone called out. "Whose law?" This from Rosa, the midwife. "I delivered that baby. She belongs here, with her people." "All her people," added Joaquin, who'd stayed to support them. "Navajo white, and everyone who calls Esperanza home." The debate continued, but something was building a consensus that surprised even Daniel. This town, for all its rough edges and divisions, was choosing to protect one of its own. Morrison attended the meeting, watching with calculating eyes. When it ended, he approached Daniel. "Impressive display," he said.
But town sentiment won't stop federal authority. Maybe not, Daniel agreed. But it might slow you down, long enough for lawyers to get involved, for newspapers to get interested. Is one baby worth that kind of attention? Morrison's smile was thin. You'd be surprised what we consider worth our attention. That night, Daniel sat by Mary Margaret's cradle, watching her sleep. Catherine joined him, bringing coffee and determination. I've been thinking, she said, about your mother's journals. She wrote about education, about bridging worlds. What if we started our own school here in Esperanza? Combining traditional teaching with modern education, showing that children don't need to be torn from families to learn. Daniel looked at his wife with new admiration. Fight their vision with a better one. Exactly. I've already talked to Father Miguel and Tom. They think investors might support a new model for integrated education. Aunt Margaret certainly would. And if the Bureau still comes for her, Catherine's smile was fierce. Then they'll face a town that knows how to protect its own, and parents who've already proven they'll never stop fighting for their freedom. The next days were tense but productive. Catherine wrote letters, organized supporters, outlined her school proposal. Daniel worked his contacts Apache leaders, Mexican merchants, even sympathetic army officers who disliked Bureau overreach. Morrison and Carr observed it all, making notes, sending telegrams. But something was shifting. The story of Esperanza's stand began spreading, carried by traders and travelers. A town defending a family's right to stay together. It wasn't the narrative the Bureau wanted. On their last day, Morrison came one final time. You've won this round, he admitted. Too much attention, too much controversy for one child. But this isn't over. The Bureau has long memories. So do we, Daniel said simply. As the government wagon rolled out of town, Esperanza erupted in celebration. At the saloon, drinks were on the house. In the plaza, guitars appeared and dancing began. Catherine and Daniel stood apart, holding their daughter, watching their neighbors celebrate. These people, Apache and Mexican and white, had stood together for them, had chosen love over law, community over compliance. No regrets, Catherine asked. Their old ritual? None, Daniel said. Though I'm thinking we should visit that creek again, remind ourselves where this all started. Tonight. Tonight. So as the moon rose full and bright, they returned to Cedar Creek, the same rocks, the same water, but everything changed. They weren't desperate strangers now, but partners, parents, pillars of their community. Daniel waded in first, then helped Catherine and Mary Margaret join him. The baby laughed, splashing in the moonlit water, unaware of battles fought for her freedom. Look, Catherine said, pointing to the bank. Wild roses. They weren't here before. You planted some last month, Daniel reminded her. From your garden. Did I? She smiled. I must have forgotten, but look how they've grown. Beauty in the desert, thriving where it shouldn't. Like them, like their love, like their daughter who would grow up belonging to all worlds and none, free to choose her own path. I love you, Daniel said. Both of you, all of this. Even the hard parts. Especially the hard parts. They made us who we are. Catherine leaned against him, their daughter between them, water swirling around their legs. Your mother knew. Didn't she saw all of this somehow? She saw two broken people who could heal each other, make something new. Daniel kissed his wife's temple, build bridges between worlds. As they stood in the creek where their story began, the moon painted silver paths on the water. Somewhere, coyotes sang. Somewhere, nightbirds called. And in this small corner of the vast territory, a family had chosen to stop running, to stand and fight, to bloom where they were planted. The woman found naked under the moonlight had become a teacher, a mother, a voice for change. The wandering warrior had found his place as protector, father, bridge between peoples, together. They'd written a different story than the one the world expected.
And this was only the beginning. In Esperanza, the town of Hope, the Yazzie family had proven that love could conquer law, that community could overcome prejudice, that the future didn't have to repeat the past. Their daughter would grow up free, educated in both worlds, belonging everywhere because her parents had chosen to belong to each other. No matter what came next, they would face it together. The woman who never ran away again, the warrior who stopped wandering, and the child who embodied the hope of new beginnings. Under the eternal moon, beside the singing water, their story continued. Thank you for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and share our thoughts about this tale. If you enjoyed this Wild West love story, please subscribe to Wild West Tales. Hit that like button and press the hype button to help more people discover these stories of love, courage, and redemption in the American frontier. Your support means the world and helps keep these stories alive.